suffocated by dust and sleep deprived. That describes the American troops who dug the fortifications at the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775. And that was before the battle even started. The provincial troops who constructed the fort on the Charlestown Peninsula just near Boston on the night of June 16th dug like their lives depended upon it. 12 hours later, their lives did. Now, the Battle of Bunker Hill happened in Charlestown, Massachusetts on June 17th, 1775. On that summer night in 1775, the Americans built a very simple structure, dirt walls with a ditch in front, and that would go down in history as the famed redoubt on top of Breed's Hill. And a main focus of the battle is what happened on top of Breed's Hill at the redoubt, at that fort, where the British mounted 2 frontal assaults on the fort before storming it and forcing the Americans to retreat. But in this video, we're going to discuss that dirt-walled fort not as the main provincial position during the battle or the British objective that it was during the battle, but instead, we're going to talk about the thirsty, hungry, sleep-deprived American soldiers who built it, and hear something about it from them in their own words. So the next time you see a map of the Battle of Bunker Hill, you won't just look at the redoubt as some strange, oddly shaped, flat black mark on some musty old piece of paper. Instead, when you look at a map, or if and when you walk the grounds of the Bunker Hill Monument in Charlestown, which stands on the spot where the fort stood, you will hear the gritty rasp of the shovels as the provincial troops drove them into the rocky New England soil over and over as they dug through the darkness to build those dirt walls. And you will feel the dust kicked up from the earth on that warm summer night as it coated the clothing of the men and constricted their throats, with no water or drink to be had and none coming. And something else is that the men who dug the redoubt were never relieved, meaning the men that dug the fort all through the overnight hours of June 16th, who entrenched upon the hill, also defended the redoubt for the duration of the battle on the 17th. By the time the battle finally ended, those men had been awake for over 36 hours. And some of the men who heaved up those dirt walls of the fort using nothing more than the muscles in their backs and the entrenching tools in their hands were digging their own graves. Some of those men never left the fort. Hi everybody, it's me, Katie. Welcome back to my channel where it is all Revolutionary War all the time. And if you've been here before, then welcome back. I am so happy that you've joined me again. And if you're new here, then welcome. I am a Revolutionary War researcher, writer, and speaker based in the Boston area, and this channel is intended to be a fun and friendly place where I share my research. Also on this channel, we venture out on historical action adventures. We visit burying grounds, battlefields, bridges. Now I hope you're wearing your adventure pants, because today we are off on another historical action adventure. and all sorts of places in between where events of the American Revolution happened. If this sounds like fun to you, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel so that you can come along on our adventures, or I hope you'll consider giving this video a thumbs up. That helps you because it tells YouTube that you want more Revolutionary War content, and it also helps me get my channel out to more and more people so that we can continue growing this Revolutionary War community on YouTube. And I'm so thankful to all of you who leave me comments and come along on our historical action adventures. It is really so much fun for me to get the chance to share my work and my passion with you all. So thank you to everyone who has come along on our adventures, and thank you to those of you who might consider doing so in the future. So back to the story of the building of the redoubt. Reveille was beat every morning at 4 a.m. So these men woke up at 4 on Friday morning, June 16th. And at about 6 p.m. that evening, they were called to muster on Cambridge Common, and they were given orders to entrench upon a hill in Charlestown. So at about 9 p.m., they left Cambridge to make the approximately 4-mile march from Cambridge to Charlestown, carrying all of the entrenching tools in the entire provincial encampment. They arrived in Charlestown about 10 p.m. and the men began to dig at about 11 p.m. after having been awake since 4. Now, we don't really know a ton about what the redoubt looked like. It had dirt walls with an exit or a sally port in the back, and the walls were maybe about 6 feet high with a wooden platform that the men could have stood on so that they could rest their muskets on the top of the dirt wall and fire. Corporal Peter Brown was one of the men who built the redoubt, and he was 22 years old, and he later wrote home a letter to his mom, and he estimated the size of the redoubt as about 10 rods across and 8 rods wide. So that factors out to be about 55 yards across and about 44 yards wide. The men were ordered to take 1 day's worth of provisions from Cambridge to Charlestown with them. So assuming they did this, or assuming they could do that if they were fully supplied, then they should have had some bread with them, some beef, maybe some pork, and some peas or beans. And they would have had their canteens, but that was it in terms of sustenance and hydration. And it wasn't enough. A man named Cartwright was on the hill on Saturday morning, and he reported that the men worked exceeding hard all night, and no refreshment had been sent them of any kind. They were almost suffocated with dust and choked for want of liquor. Now, by 5 a.m., the British knew that the Americans had entrenched upon Breed's Hill, and they probably knew earlier than that. But it was about 5 a.m. when the British Royal Navy warships in the Charles River began to fire upon the fortifications on Breed's Hill, with the fort only half done. The fort was never really done. It was never really truly finished. It was only completed as much as it could be before the battle began. So the men attempted to strengthen it continuously up until the point when they had to pick up their muskets and start fighting, because that redoubt was all that stood between the Americans on top of Breed's Hill and the attacking British. The cannons that were placed at the Copp's Hill Battery in the north end of British-occupied Boston began firing upon the earthworks on Breed's Hill at about 11 a.m. 22-year-old Corporal Peter Brown said that the intense cannon fire from the Copp's Hill Battery caused many of the young men in the redoubt to desert, apprehending the danger in a clearer manner than others who were more diligent in the digging. And I just want to take a moment to recognize those kind of unsung men who were so diligent in the digging and fortifying of the redoubt. Those men who dug with such stalwart determination and laser focus had arrived in Charlestown at 11 p.m. that night to see nothing but pasture land. But those men, using shovels and pickaxes, transformed that pasture land into a fortification that was capable of withstanding 2 and then 3 frontal British attacks, and which provided enough protection to the Americans on top of Breed's Hill that the Americans, over the course of the entire battle, including all of Charlestown, were able to inflict a 45% casualty rate on the British. Out of the 2,200 British troops who landed in Charlestown on June 17th, 1775, over 1,000 were killed or wounded. The man named Cartwright, who I mentioned earlier, who had said that the men had worked exceedingly hard all night, but without refreshment, also added that the men expected to have been relieved early in the morning, but no relief came. The men who dug the redoubt were never relieved. They were reinforced. More provincial troops did arrive in Charlestown over the course of the day on June 17th, and they filled in the redoubt and also elsewhere on the peninsula and engaged in battle. And I talk about that in my Taking Position at Bunker Hill video, which I'll link at the end of this video. Colonel William Prescott commanded the redoubt on top of Breed's Hill. It was his domain, and there's a statue of him directly outside the Bunker Hill Monument today. And he told his men, the ones that had been there all night, that those who raised the works were the best able to defend them. They had the merit of the labor and should have the honor of the victory. Corporal Peter Brown, in his letter home to his mom, said, "We began to be almost beat out, being fatigued by our labor, having no sleep the night before, very little to eat, no drink but rum. We grew faint, thirsty, hungry, and weary, but the battle had not yet begun." Thanks everybody for watching, and see you in the next video.